You might think that if the key protagonists, the politicians, behind such a significant period of time as the pandemic were found to have been lying to you, to have been telling you to do one thing and then doing something completely different themselves, which undermined so much of the policy that was rammed down our throats from spring 2020 onwards. You might think if they were exposed for that sort of deceit and hypocrisy, it would be on the front pages of papers all around the world. It would be leading news headlines that you were lied to. Well, unfortunately, it isn't. And it's been left to independent journalists like Stephen Crowder in America to expose people like Dr. J. Varma, Dr. J. Farmer, perhaps some might say, the New York City COVID czar of that period of time, a guy that was all over the media telling New York City they had to lock down for their own safety and their own good. Well, Steve Crowder's done an absolute number on him, and it's a joy to watch. So let's do that together.
Today, I introduce you to Dr. J. Varma, the man widely touted as the COVID architect in charge of New York City's COVID response. His influence over the city, how he was able to force mass vaccination on people by making them, quote, uncomfortable through applying both financial and social pressure.
It's like, I'm just gonna get vaccinated.
Why did he demand submission through fear from the citizens of New York over something that he did not fear himself at all? That's the question that ate at me, and one that hasn't been answered by any of those caught violating their own guidelines since 2020, from Gavin Newsom to Gretchen Whitmer to Nancy Pelosi.
And in the UK, you could say the same about our then Home Secretary, Matt Hancock, about Boris Johnson, about Chris Whitty, about Patrick Vallance, about Sajid Javid, who was literally pushing the vaccines on Sky News onto a reporter. I haven't seen any sort of contrition from any of the politicians in this country about the same sorts of harms: mental health, businesses closed, families destroyed, marriages ended. Because surely they believed what they were telling you as well, did they? Well, no, because we saw Partygate. We saw the fact that the same sorts of shenanigans were going on in Downing Street. We saw Matt Hancock snogging his girlfriend in Westminster on secret camera. There's a theme here. They were all at it, all across the world.
Exactly, yeah.
So how do you treat each other?
He's really smart.
Yeah.
Why is that funny?
You can see how flattering him and saying how clever he is, and the response that you get there from Dr. Varma, because so many of the key architects of that period of time were vain and egotistical, and that's why they were so easily led into lying to us, because of the convergence of benefits for their own sake. Watching this clip reminded me of the WhatsApp messages that Isabel Oakeshott exposed to the Daily Telegraph here. That was a year ago. That was in 2023. Because what we found from those WhatsApp messages was that this pandemic was working for Matt Hancock. Even when deaths were in single figures, he was exchanging WhatsApp messages with one of his special advisors about how a pandemic would propel him into the next league. That was his correspondence. It was in his interests that this pandemic happened for his own personal gain. On those messages, Matt Hancock said, "I want people to think I'm working so hard, I'm crazy," he said about the vaccine rollout. And that he said, "I think I look great in relation to images that were being exchanged." There's over 100,000 text messages that were exposed. And throughout all of them, there was never any consideration that the decisions they were making were right for you and your family and your business and your grandma in a care home or your child in a school. It was just about whether it was good for them and their own careers.
Period during
Later
which
on, I realized
there
it's
were
only 4
no
weeks.
restrictions, no mandatory restrictions in New York. And I know this, I was always on the ball. There were no mandatory restrictions.
Like rules for thee, not for me. If you're having sex parties with people, when they encourage lockdowns for other people.
No, but there's a million rules.
If you weren't afraid of it, why those policies? My point. If you're afraid of it, you wouldn't be having sex parties and you wouldn't be having dance parties with 200 people when everyone else is locked down.
No, because
And that really is the key question. If people like Varma and number 10 Downing Street in the UK and Matt Hancock snogging his girlfriend before going back to his wife and kids, if they weren't frightened of this virus, which was supposed to be so deadly that we had to close everything down, then why were they lying to you about the fact that you should have been frightened because they weren't. And if they knew at the time not to be frightened, then everything that underpinned all of that policy was bollocks.
No, because I'm saying that it's not...
And not checking for vaccination.
It's not individual.
Right?
No, those are totally different issues. I mean, I think
what I'm talking about.
What I'm trying to get at is the main issue is it's not about individual level risk.
I find it a bit frustrating as a viewer to watch this exchange because I applaud Stephen Crowder for doing this. And I understand his frustration because when you do get sat down in front of people who were part of policy at that time, you just want to shout at them and you want to tell them off and you want to question them. But what I do find a bit frustrating is not really letting Varma talk at this point, because a huge issue that whole period of time was the fact that we were not having any frank debates about this. That was the biggest issue for me, was, okay, you want to lock me down? Fine. You want to close my business? Fine. But let me explain to you why I think that's wrong. And then you can explain to me why that might be right. And those conversations weren't happening. So I do want to hear people like Varma explain themselves in a way. Nevertheless, it's still nice to watch.
For other people.
No, but there's a million rules.
If you weren't afraid of it, why those policies, my point. If you're afraid of it, you wouldn't be having sex parties and you wouldn't be having dance parties with 200 people when everyone else is locked down.
No, because I'm saying that it's not...
And not checking for vaccination.
It's not individual.
Right?
No, those are totally different issues. I mean, I think
what I'm talking about.
What I'm trying to get at is the main issue is it's not about individual level risk. It's the same thing as driving.
But it is about you as a government official being the architect of the policy.
So those things are
having sex parties and having dance parties while businesses are being shut down and New York sees an unemployment.
It's a bit frustrating as well to watch this, and it's really similar actually to the COVID inquiry that we had here over Partygate and whether Boris Johnson should or should not have eaten cake, or whether they were socially distancing when they were drinking wine. Like, the premise itself is just ridiculous. But I do understand why this conversation is taking place, because it's highlighting, it's a reminder of how ridiculous those rules were about the arbitrary numbers that were selected. But it's just kind of shining a light also on the hypocrisy of that period of time. When the Partygate inquiry was going on here and everyone was discussing this minutiae of had Boris Johnson eaten cake or not, it felt to me like a bit like a medieval battle where there would be a drummer boy in the corner drumming whilst there's thousands of people were being beheaded and slayed and horses were stabbed on the ground and everyone was dying. It was just like a massive bloodbath. And the inquiry afterwards was the fact that the drummer boy dropped his drumstick. And was that appropriate? Should he have dropped his drumstick? And you want to go, there, you're looking the wrong way. You're concentrating on the wrong thing. This conversation's a little bit like that, but it gets better.
That's twice the national average as a result of policy.
During the time, I wasn't going to these dance parties in the first year and a half of COVID. I don't know what you're talking about.
You weren't having sex parties? And then dance parties?
No. My wife and I had a party with like 10 people who everybody got vaccinated. Not vaccinated, everybody got tested and things like that.
There was over 12 people. When the gatherings at that point, you had to do in secret because no one else could gather 10 or more. People were dying alone because they couldn't visit members in the hospital.
I think you're missing the bigger picture.
And when you had 200 at the dance party, that's 5 times the amount for everyone else living in this.
What's extraordinary is that under normal circumstances, grilling a city politician on having sex parties would be the main bit of the story. But what's so amazing, given what happened from 2020 onwards, that the fact that this politician was having sex parties with 200 people, who knew there were that many people that wanted to have a sex party, is almost like the add-on to the story. It's the subtext. Just look where we've got to by 2024, how inverted the planet has become, that isn't the main bit of this story.
Culpability for people.
You probably couldn't go wrong
in this city.
No.
This city is not what it was.
I liked moving in with Jordan.
You're the architect of COVID policy. If you could change it, would you still do it?
Yeah, when you live with someone, whether they're a roommate
or...
Would you still do it?
I didn't realize that I was being set up for something.
I'm Stephen Crowder, and this is going to be for the public to see. If you have anything that you want to say about it.
This is like...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is going to be difficult. Yeah, it should be difficult. It should be really, really difficult. Unfortunately, it hasn't been as difficult as it should have been because not enough people have seen this video. However, less than a week after this was posted by Steve Crowder, Varma has lost his job Guess what his job was? I'll take bets on this. I think you probably work it out. Varma's job was Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer of Sega Technologies. But luckily, after the posting this video, he no longer has that position. Feels a little bit like justice.
I have that question. I have one more question. De Blasio, is he a weenie because he didn't enforce more authoritarian measures, or is he a weenie because he didn't stand up to the teachers' union who irreparably harmed children?
But, you know, dad's getting what dad's calling.
What Jay Varma's doing here is, we've seen it so many times. We've seen it in the COVID inquiry. We've seen it in the Senate when brave politicians have called out the architects of this period in time, is they just say nothing. And it's an extraordinary technique. They just sit there, they say nothing, they have nothing. It's basically the political equivalent of no comment, no comment.
And they split.
Yeah, the summer of 2021.
And Kyrie Irving wasn't able to play basketball because he wouldn't be vaccinated. But you're at a dance party.
What's going on here? Are you trying to...
The contempt that I have for this man and for all those other people in power who just didn't think, who just acted selfishly and immorally, it's vast, it's enormous. And when he talks about Kyrie Irving, we also must remember Novak Djokovic, who flew to Australia but was then sent home again because he hadn't had this drug that was never going to stop him catching or passing on COVID-19, that he was treated with contempt and held up as somebody that had not behaved in the manner in which the state and big pharmaceutical companies wanted him to behave. Novak Djokovic is now winning more tournaments than ever before, and he says he's stronger than he's ever been. He's a hero.
I'm not sure there's anything that I'm going to say that you would report accurately, so I'm not sure.
These are your quotes.
I'm not sure there's anything I'm going to say that you're going to report accurately. Blame the reporter. Really? Just speak. You're being recorded. So this is your opportunity, Varma, to say what you think. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear about being misquoted or that the reporting might be inaccurate. You're just being filmed. So just be honest. Say sorry if that's what it takes. Say, yeah, I got it wrong. I'd do it differently if I had the chance. But these people won't do that. And I still can't work out why. Since this video has been uploaded online, Varma's had to make a few statements, and I just want to tell you a couple of the things that he's said. He admitted that he was at a dance party underneath a Wall Street bank, and there was 200 people there. This is just, it's so shocking to me. They were telling New Yorkers to stay at home and limit the contact with others to prevent the spread of COVID-19. There's 200 people having a disco under a bank. And when Varma was pressed about this sex party situation, it was August 2020, so it was pretty much at the height of the pandemic, and he said it wasn't a sex party, it was just being naked with friends. Okay, that's not normal. He didn't even say we were naked but we had masks on. Maybe that would have been okay by his definition. No, it's just naked with friends, no big deal. COVID doesn't catch you if you're naked with friends, apparently.
Pressure, using mandates to pressure people and harass people. It's just to make them feel uncomfortable enough that they'll do what you want them to do. Is that how government serves their people in New York City?
I think the way government works in general is I was using the speed limit example, and you sort of skip by that. You know, we actually, that's a reasonable analogy to how policies are set by government, right? We know there's a certain expectation, unfortunately, that not everybody's going to comply with the rules of law. Like, for example, right here, there's seats, there's a law.
Sure.
And so the main reason you set rules in government is so that you change, again.
What Varma's doing here at this point is basically what my children do when I'm telling them off, which is they throw sand in your eyes and they try and obfuscate the truth by reflecting on a minor detail that isn't relevant. Or they start to say, well, I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one, Mum. He's just a child. He's just a child, a man-child, who was put in charge of one of the most important cities in the world and managed to run it into the ground and shows absolutely no conscience for doing so. He uses the example of the speed limit here as though that is remotely relevant, because there is a risk from cars that we all understand. And if you're going to bomb your car at 80 miles an hour outside of a primary school, the chances are someone's going to get hurt or someone's going to get killed. The risk of COVID was always vanishingly small for the overwhelming majority of the population. So much of lockdown policy was really just a failed risk assessment. And he's still doing it now. He's still saying it now. Why? Does he not understand? Or is it just still willful ignorance because he can't spend the time contemplating what part he might have played in all those businesses being closed and all those children being depressed and anxious and fat and unhealthy and having lost their way in the world? Maybe it's just too much to consider. So he has to draw some stupid analogy with a car speed limit.
To ruin people's lives.
You know, like people on the East Coast.
If you think that that's ruining people's lives,
With
people are dying en masse.
vaccines, it's like, oh, you can't get a job, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't go to school. It's like, it, I'm just going to get vaccinated.
No.
Fuck it, I'm just going to get vaccinated should never be a reason to take any sort of medical intervention, ever. And we saw the same in this country, didn't we? I remember Freedom Day, Boris Johnson promising, this is the day you're all going to be allowed to go free. And on the same day, in a piece of absolutely twisted logic, was when they said you needed to have had a vaccine to get into a nightclub. And mothers who had teenagers and young adults in their life, particularly young men at that point, we knew they were at high risk of myocarditis from the vaccines. We wept. I think I literally cried that day, because I knew that my son would want to go out into pubs and clubs. And that was the day that Boris Johnson chose to say, sorry, you've got to take this drug. We're going to push a drug on you before you get in the nightclub. You normally just get pushed them onto you once you're in the nightclub.
Twice the rate.
Look at the data on after vaccines became available on the death rate. And all the studies that have been done, if you actually want to look at the data on excess mortality, it is abundantly clear everywhere.
Varma, who I remind you went on to work for Pharma, is patently wrong about that. Evidentially now, we know there were many reasons why COVID went away, not least natural immunity that was being spread, as is the way with viruses. We were lucky it didn't get worse given that we were inoculating into a virus. So he's wrong about that, but he doesn't look like he wants to hear it. Not surprising, really, given the damage that he enacted.
I don't understand the freedom example. While you're having gay sex parties and people are losing their livelihoods and people are losing their ability to play professional sports or, by the way, to be a manager at a local company because you decide that they should be uncomfortable and feel harassed so that they get a vaccine.
It's the same reason we have regulations on everything.
It's the same reason we have regulations on everything. Still can't see it. Still can't see that that was an extraordinary period of time with unprecedented restrictions on freedom. And I think Steve Crowder's brilliant at this point when he's hammering home the point that it was about freedom. And all he says is, well, you've got to have rules, haven't you? The rules went on steroids. Freedom was completely taken away from people in cities all around the world. And you think for a moment there, it looked like the penny might be dropping. There was a look in his eyes where I thought, he might be getting it. I'd like to be locked in a room with him and many other protagonists and just tie them to chairs and talk at them and talk to them for hours on end until they start to see what they did. And then we might get some apologies.
I actually talked about. I tried to give an example about Omicron. You wanted a question about when things change and when they don't change. You know, when things, what happens when you have disease spread, when there are restrictions.
If you could do it all over again, would you do it the same way? Or would you allow people their freedoms and not harm New York City like you did? Looking back,
I think that everybody who worked in public health and healthcare during COVID was saving lives.
Saving lives. So that's how he sleeps at night. He's still deluded into thinking that he was saving lives. He wasn't saving lives during the pandemic. There were some nurses and doctors who worked really hard during unprecedented times of restrictions and a really nasty bug. They did save some lives. Not as many as they should have done because all the treatment protocols were suppressed, of course. But what he's not talking about is how many lives have subsequently been lost because of the restrictions that were imposed, because of the backlog in the NHS in the UK, because of the suicide increase, because of the deaths from alcohol following lockdowns. Excess deaths have gone up in an extraordinary way since the vaccine rollouts in every single country. Not curious about that? Does he not have any questions about that, Mr. Varma Farmer? Is he not interested to know what might have happened there? Apparently not. Obviously, Varma's had to come out now and make a statement. So let me tell you what he said. He said he was targeted by an operative for an extremist right-wing organisation. There it is again. Anybody that's counter-narrative, you're just right-wing. Determined apparently to malign public health officials and to take down the public health system in America. I would suggest it's probably the polar opposite. In those private conversations, Varma says, that were secretly recorded, spliced, diced, and taken out of context, I referred to events that transpired 4 years ago. He said, during that time, I participated in 2 private gatherings and I take responsibility for not using the best judgment at the time. He said he was facing the greatest public health crisis in a century. Our top priority was to save lives and every decision made was based on the best available science to keep New Yorkers safe. And he said, I stand by my efforts to get New Yorkers vaccinated against COVID-19 and I reject dangerous extremist efforts to undermine the public confidence in the need for and effectiveness of vaccines. Well, as you can see, he learned nothing in that conversation. And I applaud Steve Crowder and anybody that is going to hold these people to account, because frankly, nobody else is doing so. And to the likes of Hancock, Whitty, Valance, and all of you that played a part in holding down the British people during that period of time, of just crushing our freedom unnecessarily. You know where I am. I'd love a conversation. Subscribe to see more of our latest videos on the topics that you care about.